to this second field day of the Agricultural Genome to Phenome Initiative. We had our first field day the end of October, and if for some reason you missed it, second field day, go to the website that is listed here, and the recording is there. If I can have everybody mute. Okay. The AGT2PI initiative, it's a project funded by USDA NIFA with the goal to bring the crop and livestock genome to phenome communities together to embark on a project to identify what's needed to go from genome to phenome and to share ideas, learn from each other, communicate to each other about what's needed, and get ready for what hopefully will be a large-scale initiative, follow-up initiative to actually get that work done with funding from USDA. So that's the goal, but you can read a lot more about that or hear a lot more about that if you go to the first field day that's recorded. Next slide, Nicole. So by the way, my name is Jack Deckers. I'm a faculty member at Iowa State University, and I'm one of the co-PIs on the grant. So this slide just briefly shows the different activities that we're planning. The four major activities are seed grants, training workshops, conferences, and field days. And this is field day number 2. And again, go to the recording of field day 1 to learn more about the objectives of those 4 different activities. A 3-year project, and the figure here shows the things that are planned and the deliverables that are planned. Big challenge with this project is, which is really a coordinating project, coordinating the communities, is to communicate with each other across disciplines. And so this field day, and Nicole, if you go to the next slide. This field day title is Virtual Communication and Engagement Across Disciplines. We're going to hear from 2 professionals in these fields about how to best communicate across disciplines and how to engage in a virtual environment, because most of our activities, conferences, workshops, and field days will be virtual, not just because of COVID, but also to make the program cost effective. And you know, crop and livestock geneticists, we speak different language. So that's a challenge, and our first speaker is going to address that. And then our second speaker is going to address how to engage across disciplines. Before I turn it over to Pat Schnabel, who is the PI in the project and will introduce our first speaker, if you have any questions during the presentations, just put them in the chat. And then after the presentation, we will feed those back to the speakers. The speakers may also view the chat and respond to questions as they appear. But any question you have, please put them in the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat Schnabel to introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Jack. I'm very pleased to introduce Stephanie Salicek. I first met her a couple of years ago. I had an ISU faculty member who'd been invited to give a plenary talk. He's absolutely superb in his own discipline, gives excellent talks to members of his discipline. But he'd been invited to give a plenary talk to a very broad audience. And I asked around, and Stephanie was recommended as somebody who could coach him in how to give talks across disciplines. And she worked with him, and I have to say, he gave a fabulous talk. And since then, we've engaged Stephanie to work with a number of other faculty to do similar things. She delivers extraordinary results with motivated faculty who want to learn how to speak across disciplines. So Stephanie, welcome. We look forward to your remarks.
Thank you. I have to tell you, we've been helping out my nephew and his family with their kids through COVID. A couple weeks ago, my great nephew, Gabe, he's on the left, stayed with us. And one morning I was getting ready for work, online work, and he walked into the bathroom and he said, "Aunt Stephanie, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, Gabe, honey, Aunt Stephanie didn't get any natural gifts, so I'm just putting on my makeup." Well, that seemed to satisfy Gabe and he walked out. That evening, I was back in the bathroom. Gabe came back in. "Aunt Stephanie, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, honey, I'm just washing off my makeup." "Oh, Aunt Stephanie, I am so sorry it didn't work out." Now, folks, I got to tell you, I don't know what's going to work out for you in what I share today. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you. And if you just take a couple nuggets from it, I hope it's worth your time. One big thing I want to share with you is I'm going to take after the webinar, anybody who's interested in the chat room, and I'm going to draw some names and give away 4 books. So hopefully that will encourage you to participate a little bit. I do have to tell you a little something. There is a secret to communicating effectively across disciplines, online, in person, small groups, large groups. I don't know if I should share the secret at the beginning, but I'm gonna. It's a lot about becoming a more effective public speaker. That's what we're going to spend our time on today. Many of you are familiar with Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek says, no matter what is your presentation or your business, always ask the why, how, and what. So why do you want to be a better public speaker? Because you want your audience to listen, understand, and do something. Listen, understand, and do something. How do you do it? We're going to go through that in our short time together today. And what do you get? A more effective public speaker. So here we go. This is where we're going to go. This is our roadmap this morning. I'm going to spend some time on organizing your content, what to do to remove distractions, and how to elevate the experience. The first thing in organizing your content is to analyze your audience. Now, I looked yesterday and I wrote some of them down. Folks who have all kinds of different expertise are joining us today. A few I jotted down: crop breeding, data analysis, dairy genetics, ecology, educator, engineering, environmental science, genetics, microbiology, plant biology, software systems, and the list goes on and on. Whenever you give a presentation, always make sure you have some ideas who's in your audience, who has more expertise than you. What do folks know? What do they want to know? Now, I know the polling was a little disappointing for folks, and I apologize, but I got a little taste of things that maybe bother you when you're watching presentations, and then things that you hope you improve on. So it's good to know when you're working with any kind of audience, different from your discipline or the same, what kinds of things bother them when they're listening to speakers and subject matter experts. And then in the name of audience analysis, last week we had just a small Zoom meeting with some of the folks that are planning the Agriculture Genomes to Phenomes Initiative and this first field day. And I first made an assumption that probably just all folks from different institutions. But I looked at the list that Nicole set out, and I saw this Matt at thefilament.com. And I thought, well, what institution is that? But I looked up Matt and I found out he's this incredible facilitator, speaker, webinar leader who actually is going to follow me today. So you have something big to look forward to. But it was good from an audience analysis perspective that I was aware that Matt was also going to be on the conference call. So audience analysis is your number one thing for starting your content. Okay, those of you who are animal scientists out there, this was my son's summer Duroc. You have to always keep in mind introduction, body, conclusion. And if you need to have a visual in your mind, like a pig or something with your area, that's good. Most important in the introduction is that you have an attention getter. This is some way to grab your audience's attention. I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't say a word today until I told the story about my great nephew, Gabe, right? Instead of lots of conversation before you start your presentation. Try to think of an attention getter. So if you would, remember I said there were going to be prizes in the chat box, and Nicole's going to manage it. Throw in ideas that you have for attention getters that work. I told a story, but there are many opportunities. So I'm just going to pause briefly. And if you would throw in the chat box, if you're willing, things that work for you as attention getters. And Nicole, you can let me know if we get what we have. Because these prizes are really good.
All right, great. So I'm getting a joke. I'm getting fun images, playing a song related to the material, an icebreaker of some sort. More nice pictures, a meme.
Yes, all of those are great. And keep them coming if you have them, because I'm going to look back over them. The attention getter, people make 11 impressions in the first 7 seconds. And I would ask you to put in the chat box the impressions you've made of me, but that scares me a little bit. So when you're giving a presentation, a lot of times people won't know you. They're going to make 11 impressions. You can't control a lot of those, but an attention getter can draw them in right away. The second thing as a part of your introduction, folks, is to make sure that you map out where you're going. I had a slide, the 3 main points. Folks want to know. You don't get in a car and not know where you're going. Folks want to know where you're going. So tell them on the front end. And then you get to the body of that pig, or the body of your presentation. That's where you get off the interstate and you get on the back roads, folks. You want to engage people. You want to use props. You want to do all kinds of things. And I'm going to visit all of these as we continue. But the body, you can't just talk at them. And finally, the butt. You need to tell them where you went. So you're going to review your main points, and then you're going to have an ending note. So if you would, back in the chat box, what are some things that you have used as ending notes to wrap up your presentation rather than, thank you, I'm glad you could all join us, which that's not bad. But what are things that you have used that have worked as effective ending notes? If you would, just type those in the chat box if you're comfortable. And Nicole, let me know.
All right, so I'm getting a meme, again, a summary image, a message to remember, so the take home,
Yes.
The implications of results, inviting them to fill out a survey.
Yeah.
Next steps that the audience can do, a relevant quote,
Mhm.
restate the top 3 concepts that were covered, a point of contact, your summary, another story.
Great. All good. Testimonies, statistics, anecdotes, analogies, metaphors, a cartoon that you were licensed to use. Those things are good. There's a rule, it's called the peak end rule. People tend to remember in experiences and presentations, the highs, the lows, and the ending, right? So if I lose technology today, a week from today, if somebody says, hey, what do you remember about that lady that gave that presentation? Oh, I remember she lost her technology, right? She had issues because that was a low. Or if something big happens and why we're online today, the doorbell rings and you win $1 million, you'll remember that. But people also remember the ending. So that's why you want to make sure that your ending note has a real impact. So thanks for all those contributions. This is the second piece of organizing. And now the last piece that I'll share in our time together about organizing your content, my first main point, less is more. Fewer slides, less text. I know that you are a lot of smart, highly educated, very serious, achieving people. There's nothing that takes the wind out of the sails at the beginning of a presentation than looking to the left of the slide deck and seeing there are 85 slides, or looking at the first 2 slides and seeing that you're going to read it all. Do whatever you can to increase the visual and decrease the text, and also fewer slides if possible. All right, so that covers our first main point. Let's move on to removing distractions. All right. This is my little buddy Gabe, my great nephew, picking out his toe jam, right? When you got stuff in your toes, it's hard to focus. And these are some of the distractions. Now I'm going to stop sharing just for a few minutes so I can just talk with you a little bit more. What are some of the distractions? Okay, first of all, clothes. Now, I don't know what you've noticed about me, but I like to keep simple. So I just have a solid color sweater and things are simple. Now, if I wore this scarf, right? This scarf, a pretty scarf, right? But you might be slightly distracted. Now, are those her school colors? Did she make that scarf? It's got a lot going on. I wonder if she's going to try to take it off, right? Which is even more confusing. I encourage you with your presentations, keep your clothes and things as simple as possible. The fewest lines, less color, just solid, okay? Another thing is noise. Let's see. We can't help stuff, folks. We have life going on in the middle of all this, and even after this is done. I mean, I have 2 teenagers. They could come storming in the back door with no sensitivity, right? But whatever you can do to reduce the noise, and the reason that you reduce distractions, let me just repeat, is not just for the good of doing it. It's for the value of having your listener focused on the message, right? We talked about the why, the how, and the what. To get them to listen, you need to remove as many distractions as possible. And I'll have distractions today. Dr. Schnabel already told me he didn't like my background, broke my heart at the beginning of the presentation. Now, to his defense, he didn't say he didn't like it, but I have another one that's a solid brick wall that he likes better. Right? But whatever it might be, you want to remove as many distractions. Now, that actually brings me to background. So we'll segue there. Do what you can to have a background that supports you and doesn't distract from your message. So this one I have because it has my logo on it. I do not own a brick wall that is white with my logo on it. It's a banner. Right? There are companies that will make banners. The other side is the other brick wall. Right? But there are all kinds of things. Due to my situation, my home office is actually in a room with windows on all sides. So depending on the time of the day, I've got light that I need to block off in different directions. We can't be perfect. There is no perfect. Just do what you can. If you've got kids running around in the background, maybe you can't prevent it. Just be aware it may distract your audience. All right, let's see. The camera. You may not have noticed, but I've tried to look at you as much as possible in my camera. It's a little different if I look down, right? Even when I change slides, I'm not quite looking at you. As much as you can look at the camera, try to do so, because then you're connecting. If you're in person, there's a 3-second rule. You want to look at each individual 1001, 1002, 1003. When you're online, just try to look at that camera as much as possible. And a couple other distractions I want to cover: filler words and acronyms, particularly when you're talking across disciplines. People will figure out the acronym eventually, but what they'll do is they'll Google it or they'll think about it, and then they won't listen to you as much. So please, a lot of public speaking is audience etiquette. You want to take care of your audience. So use the words that are connected to the acronym, not just once, but maybe 2 or 3 times. So people, oh yes, that's what it means, right? Plus, sometimes when we use acronyms, we're not being malicious, but if we're an outsider, we can think, well, clearly they think their acronyms are better than what we have. So just do the words. Filler words, ums, ahs, ands, whatever your filler of choice is. Best way to get rid of those: videotape yourself. You can do it on your Zoom, or you can do it with your camera. Watch yourself. Another technique: have somebody drop a coin in a jar every time they hear an ah or every time. Now, if you don't want to have somebody else do it, videotape yourself, and then when you watch it back. All kinds of ways to get rid of fillers. We're all going to have some. I have some today. But to reduce those distractions, and that did come up in the poll, do what you can to remove those filler words. And then I can't say enough, and then I'll get off my distraction high horse, is practice. Practice what you can. We don't practice for perfect, we practice for permanence. So do what you can to practice. Okay. All right, let's share again and we'll look at that screen. Those are the distractions. I didn't mention the face and your hands. You can use your hands, as you can see mine right here, in your online presentations, but bring them up here and use them big. Be careful of down here where they just kind of barely creep into the picture. All right, so we've covered organization and content and distractions. What I'd like you to do is if you would throw in the chat box, distractions for you. What distracts you most? And I know some of you were able to answer the poll, but even if you did, throw in the chat box, and Nicole, she's kind enough to watch it for me. What distracts you the most when you're either giving an online presentation or you're watching one? And if you're going to say something really mean about me, maybe we could just email that later. So I'll just pause for a moment. Do we have any distractions, Nicole?
We're getting noise distracts. We're getting fellow audience if they're eating food, too many words or busy slides, noise, person not looking at the camera, filler words, distractions in your own room.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you. And just remember, the whole point of removing distractions is to help your audience. All right, let's move on. How are we doing on time, Nicole?
Yeah, you're doing really good.
Okay. The third main point I want to cover today is what can you do to elevate the experience? What can you do to make your presentation, your communication across disciplines, in person, online, more meaningful and memorable than the next presentation and the one before you? Now, I got to tell a story. I have a little tick for pumpkins. I love to raise them. I didn't have the best year this year with the dry summer and the derecho. And if any of you want to email me later who have mastered the giant pumpkin, please do. I have never done any better than something that looked like an eggplant when I tried to raise the giant. But I did start doing my little engraving this summer. So as you can see, I started mid-growth in engraving my son's name, and that's been fun to do. But what can you do to elevate the experience? Here's the first one. Even when you're online, folks, you can increase the sensory appeal. What can you see more, hear more, smell more? Think about tasting more. Okay. Last week, I did a presentation for a landscape company in Northern Iowa, and I wore my, as you can see, it's my mask with trees all over it. Oops, see, here we go. Folks, I bet if I went to those people today, they may not remember much about my content, but they're going to remember that mask because it was unique. And it might trigger them then to remember some things from the message. It is good to use props, folks. You can still use them in your online things. People remember them. Your voice. Do not deny your voice. Some of you mentioned in the poll, boring speakers were a problem. Play with your voice. You can play with your pace. You can talk really fast and speed up in the different places. And I know sometimes I talk way too fast. And you can slow down. And you can anticipate people thinking about other things and they need to process. And you can talk loud and you can talk soft. And you can play with pitch, and I'm not going to play with pitch because I'm really poor at those examples. Now, take the two words cucumber sandwich and practice with tone, right? You can be angry, cucumber sandwich. You can be sad, cucumber sandwich. You can be excited, cucumber sandwich. Okay, I know this is too much weirdness for you, but folks, the reason that sometimes you get distracted with somebody's voice is because it's monotone. So you can do things with pitch, pace, pauses, right? Tone. Play around with those things. And finally, smells. I brought some cinnamon today, right? That was my COVID test. Just kidding. I can smell it. But think about smells. Can you help your audience? Is there something with your particular message in your area that if you showed something that had a strong smell, it might strike something in people? If I were to talk to you about the snickerdoodle cookie with cinnamon on it, or cinnamon in your ginger cookie, or cinnamon in your hot chocolate, or something, you might be able to imagine the smell. And why do you do these sensory things? Because they make your presentation more memorable and meaningful. I mentioned that I was going to give away these 4 books. I'm going to give away 2 Talk Like TED books and 2 The Power of Moments. It was my way of raising the stakes. Maybe you would be inclined to add something to the chat box if I said I was going to send you a book. Now, folks, I know that in your scholarly presentations, you're not going to start giving away prizes, although why not? But is there some currency for your audience? What would your audience like? If you want 4 people to sign up for a subcommittee, might you offer them something for the first 4 people that sign up after your presentation? Maybe you would offer them a half-an-hour virtual conversation so you could exchange information and research. Maybe you agree to read a paper for them or watch a presentation. Whatever in your world works as currency. In my world, I do a lot with emotional intelligence, presentations, the customer experience. Giving away books that speak to my topic is a good way for me to raise the stakes. So keep that in mind. This is the second way to elevate your experience. And then one of my favorites, you have to break the script. People expect a talking head, I'm here, and a slide deck. What don't they expect? What can you do to surprise your audience? Why? They'll listen more, they'll understand better, they'll remember it, and they'll act. Now, humor. I'm not very funny. I think it has to do with my IQ, but I can use self-deprecating humor. I can use a cartoon that's out there for the public to use. I can tell a story that's lighthearted. Maybe there's somebody on the other side of my webinar or in my audience that I can have appropriate banter with. People are 30 times more likely to laugh in social situations. So it's good to use humor. It also increases our ability to learn, to retain. Okay. The second thing to break the script is fewer slides. People expect 85 slides. How about you just have 20? That might be a really welcome surprise for them if you have fewer slides. And before I go to telling stories, if you would put in the chat box, anybody, what kinds of things do you do in your presentation to break the script? So it's just not what people expect. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. And if you would throw in there things that you do that really surprise people.
All right, we're getting some stuff come in. Let's see, a joke, call for feedback. Share a story, use cartoons. Call on people in the audience.
Yes.
Ask questions to them. Otherwise involve the audience. A lot of that is coming in.
Great. Well, thank you, Nicole. Sometimes breaking the script can be the most challenging to think about if you're not used to it, but can make the biggest difference. Now, one of my biggest pushes today is for you to start telling stories. As you can see, I wrote down 22. Quantified Communications found that if you partner your message, your content, your serious scholarly work with a story, it's 22 times more memorable for your audience. 22 times more memorable. Think of all the hard work that you've done. And when you want to communicate that with others in your discipline or other disciplines, how you just yearn for them to remember it and to do something about it. Start telling stories. Now, my brother's a veterinarian by trade, and he wrote this book, All My Patients Have Tails. I want to tell you what, all you scholars have stories. Start keeping a journal when things happen and develop them into stories. Not so very many years ago, my dad was at the University of Iowa hospitals. He had a type of leukemia, CLL, but he unfortunately was in the 5% that it goes to the brain. He had been in the University of Iowa hospitals for quite a while. On a Wednesday afternoon, I left Iowa State University and went to visit him. We all knew he didn't have long, but he was in a teaching hospital, so he was still getting radiation. The afternoon, as I thought about leaving, I escorted him down to the ground floor, the very dark, dreary basement, for his radiation treatment. He sat in his wheelchair with his hospital robe draped around him. And when I went to say goodbye, Dad, he tried to lift his head and he put his hand up and he said, "I love you." And I got in my car and I headed back to Ames. I got to the little town of Tiffin and I stopped at what I thought was a four-way stop sign. And a gentleman came down from the north, and I think what was a grain truck, and he stopped too. But then he rolled down his window and he started yelling at me and shaking his fist at me, and I had no idea what was going on. Well, I got my wits about me and I realized it wasn't a four-way stop, it was a two-way stop, and I didn't have to stop. So I went through the intersection and I got back on the highway, and I thought to myself, would that man have felt the need to yell at me and shake his fist at me if he knew that I had left my idol to die? Probably not. After that day, I told myself I would always remember, whenever I was working with a customer or any client, no matter how they were acting, there's probably a lot going on under the surface, and I'm just going to assume they left somebody very special to die. Okay, that's an example of a story. Here are some steps to the story. I encourage you to start using these steps. You have to make sure that there's a purpose, right? And my purpose, I use this story sometimes when I'm working with folks that are dealing with customers and clients. A personal connection. We can all relate to dying. We can relate to hospitals. Common reference points: stop sign, getting in my car, coming back to Ames. Detailed characters, I tried to describe a little bit my dad in the wheelchair. Conflict, vulnerability, you get it. I don't have to spell it all out. But that's what you can do to start telling stories. Now, you don't need to cry during your stories. I have to tell you, there's a small percentage of the population who has kind of a ramped up nervous system. I'm in that small percentage of the population. So whenever I tell that very true story, I do usually tear up. But start telling stories. It doesn't matter what a serious person you are if you don't usually tell them. It will help break the script. All right, I'm soon to wrap up. Nicole, what time is it? Oh, it is 11:05, so we'll have some time for question answers, I think. So these are the three things that I talked with you about that are important so that you can help your audience listen more, understand, and move to some sort of action, right? The secret to communicating across disciplines is to truly become a better public speaker. It's audience etiquette. You always want to take care of your audience. And you can do that by organizing your content effectively, removing distractions, and elevating the experience. Maya Angelou said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never, ever forget how you made them feel. If you can take care of people, they will take care of you. Most people judge us quickly on our likability and our credibility. Now, I'm going to guess, well, throw it in the chat box. First one gets a prize. Will they forgive you more quickly if you make a mistake with your credibility or your likability? First one with the right answer, Nicola, let me know. Will your audience forgive you first with likability or credibility?
We've got a lot of likabilities coming in.
That is true. It is right. So I'll have Nicole, if she can see the first one that came in, I'll send you something special.
Yeah, I got the name.
Likability. People will forgive you on credibility if you own up to your mistake. I know this may be hard for you to hear. If you own up to it and you give them the right information, but people often will not forgive you on likability. And people will always remember. People do business with people that they know, they like, and they respect. And as a presenter, you can try to fulfill all those needs. I have to tell you before I wrap up our formal time together that I grew up a very heavy child, and I had all kinds of nicknames, but we won't go into that. But I remember in 3rd grade, I was on a field trip, and I grew up in the southeast corner of Iowa in a town, Fairfield. And we were at the Dexter Company, and we had taken our tour, and we were lined up to get on the little yellow school bus. The teacher had counted us all, and we were just about to leave. My classmate, John Grunwald, went to the front of the line, and he said to the group, "Hey, let's get Stephanie on the freight scale before we leave and see how much she weighs." Folks, I got to be honest with you. I'm 54 years old. I remember that like it was yesterday. So if you're giving a presentation or communicating online, in person, different discipline, same discipline, and you ignore somebody's comment in the chat box, or you marginalize it or dismiss it, or take a question and say that you think you already answered it, or identify it as not a very smart question, you get my idea. Never do anything to your audience that doesn't help them save face. And with that, my family at the Stroutman Tree Farm and a little bit of contact information. So I think with Nicole's blessing, I will go ahead and stop sharing. And I think if anybody has a question, I just show about 7 after, if that's correct. If anybody has a question, I would welcome those questions right now.
Hey, thank you very much, Stephanie. Very useful information. The reason why we asked Stephanie to talk to this group is because, as we go through the next 3 years, our field days, our conferences, our workshops, we'll have many people presenting, including, we want to engage people, and so including presentations from you who are in the audience. And during our launch, we asked for IDs or volunteers to give future field days, and that's still open. So go to the website and you can enter the information there, or IDs for conferences or workshops that you're willing to give. And so we're all going to be in that situation where we will be communicating across disciplines. And what Stephanie shared with us is not only useful for this project, but I think it's very useful for our day-to-day lives and day-to-day work. One thing I learned is that my background is totally inadequate, so I'll have to find a brick wall. Too many details. Probably people are trying to zoom into the pictures on the wall and see who's all on there. But yeah, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And I neglected to introduce Nicole Scott, who you've heard from, and she's our program specialist and making everything click and doing a great job. And so, Nicole, if you have any questions that you want to feedback.
Yes, so I have the first question is, how do I know if my joke or story is appropriate for my presentation?
Yes, thank you. First of all, make sure it's relevant to your presentation. I want to make sure that I'm clear. You don't want to tell a story or joke or anything that doesn't somehow tie into your message and help your message, help the folks understand it. Practice your joke. Tell it to folks. Ask them to be honest with you. Make sure you're telling people who really will tell you that's not appropriate. That's really the key, is to share it with others prior to your presentation.
Great. I have another question. How can we create enthusiasm in our voice as we present?
So I mentioned some of those vocal things that you could do. I think it's a matter of just pausing and in your head remembering, I've been talking at these people a long time. Maybe I can do some things with my voice. Best if you practice those ahead of time. Sometimes I can be a little too animated, but if you practice in the mirror and then record for your voice, you can improve some of those things to help your message. So the easiest one is use cucumber sandwich and try to say it mad, happy, sad, and play around with your vocal qualities.
Great. And one more question here. Oh, a couple more just popped in. So is it useful to write out a presentation? Because lots of times the script changes every time you practice it.
So I think I understand the question to be, should you actually sit with a script when you're giving the presentation? I have to tell you, in my first life, I was a high school speech teacher. So I prefer that you just have note cards available that you're using so that you're not reading it and you can look at your audience, whether it's online or in person. I hope that answers the question.
I think so. That's how I interpreted it. Okay, another one is, what are the biggest mistakes that scientists make when speaking to curious and educated non-scientists?
I think this applies across the board, but acronyms always, an assumption that basic knowledge in your field is basic knowledge for everyone. This is very tough for scholars to understand. I've had the opportunity to work with many wonderful faculty members and subject matter experts. There is a very big worry that if I in any way break it down, that I'll lose credibility and people will not have any idea that I actually have the knowledge that I do. It will work the opposite. Break things down, make them simpler for your audiences. Most importantly, if not everybody is in your same discipline, so that they can understand and that your message is communicated clearly.
And that was the last question that's popped in.
All right. Thank you very much.
I have one question here.
Okay, Dr. Decker.
And so what's your view on using animation in slides?
Thank you. Question, and if I may, I'll even extend that, animation videos. They're okay. I didn't share anything, but there's quite a bit of research out there right now that the fewer videos and animation, the better. Of course, there's the technical issue. You're not 100% sure that's going to be there for you, but also for some, it can be distracting. Now, many of you have videos to use because it's part of what you're doing and you're showing your product. Most definitely use those. Just don't overdo it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Stephanie. And if there's additional questions, put them in the chat and we'll get them to Stephanie. And Stephanie will stay on. So
absolutely.
We can also get her involved in the discussion after the next presentation. And Carolyn Lawrence Dill, faculty member at Iowa State and a co-PI on the grant, she's going to introduce our next speaker. So Carolyn.
Thank you, Jack. Our next speaker is Matt Homan, and the reason I'm introducing him is because, at least for this project, I'm the person that found him. So Matt is somebody that I've worked with once previous, and it was for putting together a conference that some of you may have been involved in, where Ivan Baxter at the Danforth Center was bringing together people to talk about how better to work across physiology and genomics. We had planned this conference pre-COVID, and then we were going to be holding it in April. And clearly we didn't, because no one was holding conferences in April. And we had intended originally to hold that conference in St. Louis at a company called The Filament. And you see the website for that right now on your screen, thefilament.com. And it turned out that Matt's business is holding conferences, and when COVID hit, they had to pivot. And so working with Matt, we went with him and pivoted to having an online conference. And I can tell you that my own personal experience with that was just fantastic. It was the most engaged conference I've been to, perhaps bar none, including in-person conferences. So Matt is the founder of The Filament, where they design and facilitate meetings for in-person and virtual situations that help people to think together better. They've worked with many different companies that you probably know the names of, Nestle, Dell, Washington University, Wells Fargo, lots of places. But I can tell you from my personal experience, I was just, my socks were knocked off by how it was that Matt's group managed a virtual meeting in a way that we were all genuinely engaged. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who's going to talk with you about how they do that.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. That the challenge, and we're going to talk about meetings specifically here in just a moment. But I think the biggest problem that we had when we decided to switch, often by necessity, often immediately with very little preparation, is we found ourselves starting to think about. We had an in-person event; it was scheduled for a day. That means our virtual meeting should be scheduled for a day. And so instead of thinking about the things we could only do virtually, the things that asynchronously we could do more effectively, the more people we could bring into the mix, the easier collaboration might be using multiple tools. So many people immediately pivoted to, let's just do an 8-hour Zoom. And for those of us who remember those 8-hour Zooms in March, April, May, we never want to do it again. And so the way that we think at Filament is we wanted to say, it used to be, what could we only do in person? Now it's, what can we only do virtually? And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about meetings generally first. I'm going to share my slides here, or my single slide here in a minute. And I also would love for you to throw into the chat any questions you have. I will say this, I'm going to be covering lots of tips around meetings generally, which is where we'll start. You don't need to worry about taking notes. Not only is this being recorded, but I have a killer worksheet that has everything that I talk about that we'll share out at the end of the event. So if I'm going to take over the screen here real quick, I'm going to stop Nicole's screen sharing, go here, share this, and hit play. So it's really hard to be a presenter following someone who's talking about effective presentations. So I'm breaking nearly every one of Stephanie's rules, not by intention, probably just because I don't know any better. But we're going to talk about virtual collaboration. I have one slide. Now the slide's going to change a little bit. The colors might mix, but I have one slide. Generally, I don't use slides at all because we don't present at Filament, we facilitate. So much of our work is getting smart people to think together better, to do things together, to be collaborative, to have the conversations that only they can have. About 2.5 years ago, our first engagement with the Danforth Center was around a summit for digital communication and collaboration around the Rapidopsis. All I know about that is I can barely pronounce it, right? But we brought a bunch of really smart people talking about how they were engaging, and our challenge was to find the questions to ask and build the tools for them to ask those questions and engage with one another and not to be experts. And so my viewpoint as I come to this, and I'm sharing these with you, is to not say I'm an expert telling you what to do. I'm an expert in meetings, right? So to be fair, what I'm sharing with you now is probably I have a bit more expertise than normal, but our work as facilitators does not require us to be experts. In fact, the dumber we are, the smarter our clients believe us to be, because we are literally asking the questions and getting credit for their answers. So we're going to talk about virtual collaboration. And the one thing we know is virtual collaboration happens in meetings, right? Whether a conference is a gigantic meeting, whether a faculty retreat is a medium-sized meeting, whether the 5 people who need to get work done, this all happens in meetings. So where we're going to talk now, so we're going to talk about meetings, and this is true. Your meetings suck. And here's how to fix them. We didn't put this in the survey, but no one even likes their own meetings. It's not even like the Lake Wobegon theory of children where yours are slightly above average. Everybody hates meetings, and yet that's the thing we spend most of our time in. We do gigantic percentages of our day, and yet as we do this and spend all our time, we don't take any time trying to get better at them. It's always mystifying to me how we think so much about meetings, how we complain about them, how we look at them, fill our calendars, and yet we don't do anything about them. So in this presentation, I'm going to give you probably about 20 tips on things you could do to make your meetings better. And all of them will apply not only to your 3 or 4 person meetings that you might have nearly every day, but to meetings that are going to be much larger, be more collaborative, and will be some of the kinds of things that will keep coming out of this particular workshop that we're talking about. A couple other quick things. This is probably the number one meeting energy tip that I have. If you go up in the upper right-hand corner, and you don't have to do it right now because most of you are just staring at the screen and not looking at because you've got your cameras muted. But if you're presenting, go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and Zoom, click on the 3 dots and hide your self view. We are almost always focused on ourselves and our audiences when we're in Zoom. And we can't help but look at ourselves. Like, that's who we are. Humans, you just want to stare at yourself. But I've never presented in a room full of live people, or dead people, I guess, for that matter, with the mirror in front of my hand. You know, walking around staring at myself while I'm also staring at the room. Our brains are trying to process 2 things at the same time. How do we look? And what is the audience doing? And so my suggestion to you, in your next meeting, the simplest thing you do, turn off your self view. So here we go. Meetings. Meetings are our culture, right? How we collaborate. It's how we work. And I see so many people think about our culture in our organization is great, right? We like each other. We love the work. We're smart at what we do. And yet they'll say at the end of a meeting, someone says, oh, we'll all talk about the meeting after the meeting and we complain about what just happened. That's culture too. And so if you want to be better at meetings, it will be the #1 ROI that you can possibly develop for your career. And I think this is true. Presentations are important, but you spend far more time in your meetings than you even do in presenting to your peers. And so becoming good at this is a crucial thing for you to do in your career. It's also something that if you're good at this, at meetings, you will become better at presenting. There's so much overlap in this Venn diagram. So meetings are your culture. They're how you show up. And virtual is hard, right? We went to virtual almost with a snap of a finger, and we thought, wow, this is hard. These meetings are terrible. They were probably terrible beforehand, but we didn't get donuts, right? The fact that we're now virtual using unfamiliar tools in unfamiliar ways with all the distractions that are home, the kids are the other end of the dining room table doing their homework, FaceTime with their friends, playing Minecraft, the spouse who's sucking up all the Wi-Fi for his or her Zoom call that is also going on at the same time, the cat walking across your screen. Virtual is hard, and it's harder than in person. And we've learned this when we think about a virtual meeting versus an in-person one. And Carolyn, the conversation, the conference we did with you was a perfect example. In a regular in-person conference, you kind of set it and forget it, right? It's not quite the George Foreman grill, but the moment the day starts, the train starts rolling. All right, it's very easy to get the day going, and whatever you plan kind of happens, right? And because everyone's there and together, it's dramatically easier to forgive some of the bumps. But what happens in virtual is because that hour-long meeting that follows another hour-long meeting that follows another hour-long meeting, in a conference setting, those might be 8 hours in a row. We split them up. Hour and a half here, 2 hours here, hour and a half here. And it makes it harder because you're now spending more time in between preparing. The other thing in virtual, and I'll just be quick about this, we've all noticed this, is that inside a room, it is easy to hide in person. And it seems kind of counterintuitive. But when I'm in a gigantic room full of people, it's very easy for me to know that I'm actually not the center of attention. Right? The speaker is up front, the facilitator's over on the other side, people are having a conversation, someone else is standing up, and I get a chance to take a breather. Inside virtual events, especially meetings when everyone stays on video, it almost feels like you're being looked at all the time. And so we're exhausted. It's not only looking at ourselves in a mirror, but it's always feeling like we're on stage. So this is the other thing that I totally believe to be true. I rarely use PowerPoint. No one loves your slides but you. I don't care how good they are. You have spent way more time on your slides than is probably necessary for your audience to know the difference. Let me put it this way. Everything Stephanie said is 100% right. Your slides need to be good. But if you spent half the time on improving your presentation, telling your story, thinking about the things that you want to say, versus making sure you get that exact right font down and that really cool GIF now playing in the background, your slides are important sometimes. But as a challenge, if you want to mix things up, try your next presentation without slides. Now, that's presentation, and sometimes it's expected, right? There's data you've got to show to people. But in meetings, you hardly ever need slides, right? If you're in a meeting with 10 or fewer people, send your slides out ahead of time. Let people read them, and even better, add some more context to them than might otherwise just be as an image on the slide, and use your time together to talk about those slides, talk about the conversation versus you presenting to a room full of people. In person, virtually or otherwise, there's only a handful of things you can do in a meeting. You can share something, you can update someone, you can plan something, you can solve or brainstorm, or you can decide something. It's rare you can do more than 2 of those things, and the best meetings only do 1. And brainstorming isn't something that is particularly easy to do in a meeting, virtually or otherwise. You're far better off throwing a challenge out and say, hey, spend an hour, give me a list of 20 ideas, do it on your own, do it in silence, and come back and we'll share our ideas one at a time versus me sharing the ideas that pop up in my head. And here's why. If you're an extrovert, and some of us are, most of us aren't, you're going to find that it's very easy for you to brainstorm because the moment something pops in your head, it pops out in the real world. But for the introverts, they're thinking, and they're not sharing. And when they're not sharing, you now have silenced a significant amount of your audience or your participants because you've built a way to connect with ideas that only works for half of the people in the room. So this is the most profound thing about meetings that I've come across in the last decade. And I'm in this business. Meeting math. An 8-person meeting for an hour is an 8-hour meeting. It's one day, right? It's an hour for everybody, but you add it up, it's a person. And so I'm not very good at math. I'm not a scientist. I'm a political scientist. So, and I'm a recovering lawyer. So if you want to call me Dr. Scientist, it's only because I've got a JD and a political science degree, unlike everyone else in this video. But if we do the math, if we do a weekly 8-hour meeting, that's 400 hours a year. If everyone is making $50 an hour, that meeting costs the organization $100,000, right? Now, if you're a professional, I mean professional like someone who's billing like a lawyer or an accountant or someone else who has an hourly rate, that cost may go to $1 million a year for one meeting, right? And so now think about your calendar and all of the meetings that are there, all of the meetings that are an hour here, an hour there. It's death by 1,000 cuts. But if you were thinking about needing more people to do something, the first way to find those people is to shorten or cut your meetings completely. Here's the other thing. This will be terrible for data scientists in the audience, but when you're ever asking anyone to rank anything on a scale of 1 to 10, eliminate the number 7. Because that's where we always go. Super simple tip, but I found that when you're asking people to rank something, getting rid of 7 makes decisions go faster in meetings. Here's another one. Agendas always. Your agenda in a meeting, whether it's to a gigantic conference or to 4 or 5 people, needs to have 4 things on it. Number 1, we are here to accomplish. Number 2, it's important for us to do it together and at the same time because by the end of this meeting we will, and your specific attendance is necessary because. Now, these don't have to have more than 10 words apiece, maybe even less than that. But if you can't answer these questions, you're going to get a room full of people wandering in, oftentimes late, virtually or otherwise, not knowing why they're there, and your meeting will suffer because of it. Homework works, right? There's a lot of educators here in this room. Give homework. Before this meeting, I expect you to do this. Carrots and sticks. If you do this, you'll get this. I love Stephanie's advice on that. If you don't do this, I'll do this. The best carrot, if you do this, we don't have to have the meeting. Think about that for a moment. If our meeting is to decide something, or if our meeting is to share something, if we can do that ahead of time and everyone commits to reading everyone else's updates, we don't have to have the meeting. If you don't, now you got to think about what levers of power are at your disposal. But if you don't, if it's clear you come to a meeting unprepared and haven't done the homework, you don't get to come, right? You get to leave, right? Or we sit here and wait while you read the document while you do what you're supposed to do. Role play in any meeting. And this is really, really important when you're starting to think about bigger meetings, collaborating with others. There's a facilitator, right? It could be the MC or the master of ceremonies, but the facilitator's job is to make the meeting run the way it's supposed to run. There's a note taker, less important today than it used to be, right? All of these AI transcription tools, some of what we've been seeing already here in this meeting are incredibly valuable. there's a timekeeper, and there's a decider. And I'm going to talk about decider here in just a moment. But those roles need to be defined ahead of time. I don't know how many meetings I've been in where everyone around the room thinks they're the decider. And no one thinks they're the note taker. If you're someone who's fairly junior inside an organization and you're coming into meetings, one of the things you might want to volunteer to do is be that note taker, right? Be that timekeeper. It gives you a bit more power than you might otherwise have. It also gives you a chance to connect with everyone both before and after the meeting and elevate your role perhaps in your organization in a way that might be a little bit different than if you're just an attendee in the background. There are 4 creatures in every meeting. Now, as we think about conferences, these show up not only in your conference, but in your planning conversation. There are elephants, there are zombies, there are squirrels and porcupines. An elephant in the room is the gigantic thing that everyone knows is there and everyone is pretending is not there. Every meeting has at least one elephant, right? You know what the elephants are right now. If I think about the last meeting you had that you felt was kind of less successful or necessary, an elephant reared its head and blasted its trunk, although you thought you were the only one who could hear it. Zombies in meetings are the issues that never seem to die. They come back over and over and over again, and we can't seem to kill them because we don't make the intention and the time to do so. Squirrels are the things that distract us, right? I have idea surplus disorder. I get easily distracted by cool, funky, interesting things. Ooh, there's a squirrel right over there, right? That's a problem. But if we call it a squirrel, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit easier to deal with. And finally, and this is the one that's most profound and most important and kind of came as the most surprising to us as we developed and rolled this out, is the porcupine. The porcupine is a thing that is hard to share. And so as a facilitator, and Carolyn remembers this when we were planning our conference, you know, the porcupine, I'll share with an entire room full of people as a facilitator, hey, if there's a porcupine, let me know what that is. You might not be able to share it widely. A person might be misbehaving, right? They might not be living up to the code of conduct for your event. They might be mansplaining. God knows that happens all the time. They could be just something that I'm uncomfortable sharing. 2 things happen. One, as being a facilitator, being that person who says, here's the roles, elephants, zombies, squirrels, and porcupines. And for the porcupines specifically, let me know and I'll take care of them. But the other thing is when you put these silly sounding creatures out into the world, people start raising their hand and saying, no, I think this might be an elephant. Or I think this is a porcupine. And by even calling them these kind of silly things, what starts to happen is you engage with the things that otherwise tend to derail your meetings. And you get to the point where you're dealing with a meeting that might have 10 or 15 or 20 or 100. Those elephants, zombies, squirrels, and porcupines are incredibly destructive unless you count them out. Here's a simple tip. If you've got chat inside your Zoom, just like we did before, my favorite way to do it is to ask a question, but don't let anybody answer it until you count down from 3. So you give people a minute, say, here's a question I want you all to answer. Let's talk about elephants first. Think about an elephant in the room. I'll give you a minute. And now I go 3, 2, 1, hit enter. And all of a sudden, everyone's answers stream by at a rapid pace versus them kind of popping up one at a time. The beauty of that as a facilitator, I can then turn around and say, hey, Jack, looks like you've got an elephant. You mind talking more about that? It allows me to call on the room in a way that doesn't allow people to hide and doesn't feel a negative way. And they've already kind of volunteered some information. So they're more engaged with the conversation than calling on them at random. My other favorite tip, and I know that this isn't an elephant, zombie, squirrel, or a porcupine, but when we had our first conversation, when I met the rest of this team, one of the things that we do is we might ask for a volunteer. Sometimes I'll ask who wants to go last. That's an easy one to get someone to raise their hand, but then they get to pick the person to go next. And so now I'm no longer the bad guy. I'm the one who now is seeing the group pick on one another. It works great in person as well, as long as you're in a room less of 50 people where people can keep track of who's been called upon. But sharing even that little thing is a wonderful way to engage. I know I'm going through a bunch of little tips, as I'll jump back in the presentation, but the other thing is if you rename people inside Zoom, if you're trying to use breakout groups, which we use all the time, number them either ahead of time or ask them to number themselves if you're not going to do the Zoom automatic breakout function where they get to choose where they want to go or where you get to, where they just automatically are random. because when you build the breakout rooms, those it comes alphabetically, and having a number in front of a name makes it dramatically easier to sort everyone out. All right. So at Filament, we do experiments. Think about it all the time. We live that ourselves, but we also encourage our customers to do that. An experiment is something simple. It's a little bit bigger than an idea, but it's not any bigger than that. An experiment is smaller than a pilot. A pilot is smaller than a project. A project is smaller than an initiative. You start to think about that kind of hierarchy or framework in every meeting that you run, control, or influence. What's an experiment you might try? And here's how to frame it. Something simple I'm going to try in this meeting is, and I think it just might work because. The flip side is something I'm not going to do this time, and I wonder if anyone will notice because, right? Super simple little things, but each time you start to play through this idea of what an experiment is, and in the end, you'll know if it worked when. What's your hypothesis, right? How do you think about those experiments? And there are dozens and dozens of experiments you might try in meetings. I want to talk about a couple. The first is to not have the meeting, right? You're all writers at some point. Good emails are better than bad meetings. And I think that about half of meetings should have been an email. But it requires engagement and collaboration. It isn't just, I'm going to send you an email. It's artfully written, action points, requests, and then a way to track whether people have actually engaged with it or not. Oftentimes the update, when it's one person talking in the room, going back to that meeting math, if I have 10 people in a meeting, including myself, and we each give a 6-minute talk, right? Here's a 6-minute update from Carol, and here's a 6-minute from Jack, 6 minutes from Stephanie. That meeting might take an hour, right? 6 minutes for everyone. But for 10 people, that's a 10-hour meeting. If, however, I go through and spend time with each person individually, one-on-one, the time load of that meeting goes down to 2 hours, right? It's 6 minutes times 2 times 10. But that just little change could be done even more easily in an email. I want everyone to give me the update. We'll share them. We'll talk about it. And if we need to have a conversation, we'll have that in our meeting, but we're not going to deal with the updates because it's only relevant to the person who's sharing. 47 minutes. Again, I'm no math major. I know that I can't add 47 more than 2 or 3 times in a row. Right now, our calendars become the easiest game of Tetris ever. 60 minutes, 60 minutes, 60 minutes, 30, 30, 60, 60, 60. We have, by using default meeting times of 60 minutes, have made it unbelievably easy for people to take all of our calendar away from us. Put a meeting at 47 minutes. Now, if you want to be really clever, start it at 13 minutes past the hour. Let anyone who wants to join early join those 13 minutes, have whatever chit chat and conversation they want, have the virtual donuts that you otherwise would have had in person. But by taking that 47 minutes, you're almost guaranteed that people will not keep stacking meetings right after the other, not giving you time to even just go, right around the corner in your house to the restroom, because meetings fill the time that they've been allotted. If you've got a shorter meeting that you think should be 30 minutes, turn it to 17. Right? There's a little bit of magic in these prime numbers, but most importantly, thinking about how short a meeting can be, knocking 13 minutes off a meeting that has otherwise been an hour for 5 years in your department that happens twice a week will be unbelievable, the amount of impact that can have. After every meeting, this is important in conferences, this is important whenever you're collaborating, but I think this is crucial, and this is an insight a customer gave to us. Make 2 lists after every meeting. The first list, what decisions did we make? Right? Let's capture it. What decisions did we make? That might be one of the last questions you're asking before you finish a meeting. We decided to do this. The second one is, what decisions do we need? There's things we didn't do because the person wasn't here, because the money was unclear, because there was executive sponsorship we need to go, and assign someone to get each of those decisions. What will happen is now all of a sudden you have a conversation at the next meeting, assuming this is a regular meeting, and say, Carolyn, did you get those decisions? She might come back and say, yeah, the dean said that it was our decision. We're good. But that gap between the conversations we have and making decisions is where most of these meetings go to die. And so as you're planning meetings, right, as you're thinking about a gigantic meeting or a small one, think about what decisions you make in each one of those planning sessions and which ones you need, and keep a running track of those and cross them off. Put them on Post-it notes in your wall and move them from one column to the other. But when you fail to capture things virtually about the decisions you need, they just disappear. It happens in person too, but it's even easier because the conversation after the meeting, where some of that might otherwise take place, dissipates because everyone hits end meeting at the exact same time. Here's the other one. Do things in person that you can only do in person. And I use in person in quotes here. This was the Filaments fundamental meeting. We don't do PowerPoint here. We don't do presentations. We get people to collaborate because we wanted to do in the room only things you could do in the room. And when COVID hit, we were really freaked out, right? Our first thought was, oh my goodness, our entire business, we have a 20,000 square foot facility that I'm in right now. And I've been the only one here since March. But we thought our business is going to crash, right? Because we only do in-person stuff. And we realized quite quickly, thankfully, that the same truth applies, right? When you gather people together, do in the room only things you can do in the room, even if that room is in Zoom, right? If you think about sharing information, right? Do we have to do that in person, right? What if the hour that we've scheduled is for us now to unpack that conversation? I'll give you one little simple tip. And this works unbelievably well in big conferences. You put you give 2 or 3 speakers instead of an hour keynote, they each get maybe 15 minutes, right? If they've got smaller things to say, they can each take 5, 5, 5. But you do that for the keynote. They can use slides if they want, but they give their presentation, they focus on their 3 main points and they don't get any of the superfluous stuff. And then you give the room silence. Now this room could be in person, it could be virtual, and you let the introverts process what they just heard. Everyone has a worksheet, virtual again or otherwise, and they capture things like, what did I like? What am I curious about? What questions do I still have? What didn't seem so great? What might I apply, right? So they're thinking now and processing the information they just heard from the speakers. Then you give them in breakout groups 20 minutes to talk with one another, right? So now they're not only processing, they're networking, they're engaging, they're collaborating upon what they just heard, whether it was 1 speaker or 3 shorter TED-style speakers. In the meantime, that speaker can kind of hummingbird from group to group, right? Virtually, it's even easier than it is in person, answer any specific one-on-one questions they have. And when they come back, the person who gets to share is the table, right? The group gets to ask a question of the speaker, not an individual. Now, I'm guessing this has happened to every single person more than once, but in person, it's always one, and it's always a guy. I wish this weren't true, but raises their hand and has the question that's not really a question, that's more about being brilliant with a little bit of inflection at the end and a don't you agree? And the entire room rolls their eyes, turns on their phone, peruses their Twitter feed, or answers email. By making every group come back with a question, if the table wants to ask a question, the breakout room versus individuals, you tend to eliminate a significant amount of that friction that's irrelevant to most of the audience. Kind of last but not least, we have been working, and we do at Filament, we do these meeting design sprints where we sit with companies, again, virtually now, and we help them unpack and think about a meeting they hope to, a meeting that has high impact or high stakes, or one that takes a lot of time. And we built this worksheet. So it's on the slide. I will put in chat as soon as I stop sharing. I'm going to put a link to this where you can download this yourself. But everything I just talked about, the worksheet is designed, and we use it as 11 by 17. So we fill these out all the time in the real life, although there's a Google Sheet version that I'll also share the link to. And the idea is, if you're intentional about your meetings and ask each of these questions one at a time, very intentional, the agenda, the incentives to prepare, the meeting rules, and so on and so forth, even the elephants, the squirrels, the zombies, and the porcupines, what starts to happen is you meet more effectively. Now, when you're thinking about collaboration, right? Virtual collaboration, when you're thinking about engagement at large scale, nearly every single one of these lessons applies. The only thing that's a little bit different is that there is pull towards traditional formats in bigger meetings that is far harder to resist than in smaller ones, right? In a small meeting, it's fairly simple to say, let's try this. And as long as everyone knows you, fine. The moment you're thinking about a big conference, right, virtual or otherwise, we're tending to put in charge of those big events the same people who were in charge of the in-person ones. The person who ran the exhibit hall with booze and people paying $200 to get a trash can and $500 to the union folks to be able to plug in their video, they're looking at just trying to replicate this in-person experience virtually. if you've been into any of these virtual conferences, they're not that great. Right? There's bits and pieces, right? We can do the presentation, right? We've solved for that, hopefully just like we're doing now. We've built some networking, right? Small groups work really well. There's some networking specific tools, kind of like a chat roulette style. But we've not been particularly good at the serendipity. So when you're building a virtual event, think about time to talk. My best and favorite thing that we started doing that is powerful and seems crazy because it is the oldest thing we could do is we'll put people into breakout groups with 2 people. Say one of you trade your phone number, log off, go for a walk and have a conversation on your phone. Get away from your screen, engage with people the old-fashioned way, and you see people's eyes get as big as saucers. Like, oh my goodness, right? Somehow we made this rule that every single meeting all of a sudden had to be like the one we're doing now. Looking at a screen. A lot of you have gotten thousands of emails answered collectively in the time that we've been here together because you can't help yourself, right? Because it's not as rude to do it virtually than it is in person. But if you start to think about the things that brought you to conferences, right? It's not always the content, it's a connection. And we don't design for those as intentionally as we should because they always happened automatically when we were together. And so if I give one last tip, whether it's about meetings specifically, but more to the point about virtual collaboration, make more time for that small group connection because that's the piece that otherwise misses when people hit log off and finish their session. So your meetings don't suck anymore, they rock. There's my email, we'll share it out again. That's my Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. I know we've got some questions, I hope, at least. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'll share the worksheets out here. I've got 3 screens in front of me, so it takes me a while to find my mouse here. But let me stop my share. And Nicole, while I do that, go ahead, if there's some questions, send them my way.
Okay, I'll jump in here. Thanks very much, Matt. Very, very informative again, and again, not just for the purpose of this program, but our day-to-day lives. And I was thinking, and I've talked to some other people here on campus, the challenge of teaching in a virtual environment, and a lot of the ideas that you shared apply there too. Maybe depending on the class, what may be different is that in the meetings that we're having, or we're hoping to have, everybody that's joining does that because they want to join. And that's not necessarily always the case with other meetings that you go to or students that are in our classes, right? So any advice of how to do this engagement when you're having members in the audience that are not motivated to be there?
Well, they probably weren't motivated in person either. So we can kind of talk like there's some things that just the technology doesn't solve. I will say this though, and there's a couple things that we do, and this gets to one of the questions that I saw here on the list as well, is that this quicker you break out into breakout groups, if you're networking an event, don't wait till the end. First thing you do, just like we would have otherwise had coffee and bagels in the back of the room with a couple handshakes, is put people into small groups. If I'm in class, I would do that very quickly. Even if they're not engaged with you, they'll be engaged with their peers. So the breakout groups are a wonderful way to get engagement. Then the group reports out in some way versus an individual having to do so. And if I have an opportunity to put people in groups, 3, 4, or 5, once you get bigger than that, it's again easy to hide. And even when people are doing video and their cameras are off, they almost always come on in the breakout room. So okay. I wouldn't sweat engagement, ask some polls, ask some questions. One thing we've done to increase engagement, apart from having people turn off their self view, which helps, is we rarely facilitate a meeting in the afternoon because unless we've got a time zone differential where it's unavoidable, because getting people fresh where they haven't already had 8 Zoom meetings before you log on, and that's what your students are dealing with in some cases, right? As they think about all the other classes and coursework they have, you get the benefit of them being really tired by the time it's your turn. And I will say one other thing from an energy standpoint, I love Stephanie's tips. One for me is stand up, right? If you're someone who presents in front of a room, if you're a professor, right? And Dr. Deckers, you might be in front of a room wandering back and forth, whether you've got PowerPoint or an old-fashioned chalkboard or somewhere in between, standing up makes a huge difference. Because you wonder why your energy isn't as high. It's because you're sitting down, and you would never sit down behind a desk in front of a room full of 200 people and talk to them unless you're David Letterman, right? Or someone who is in the business of that. And so think about movement, think about body position. And maybe if it's just a matter of taking a bunch of books and stacking them up so your computer and your camera a little bit higher, I think you'd find a dramatic difference in your energy, and it would work its way down to your audience.
Okay, thank you. Nicole, are there any questions?
Yes, we have a couple of questions. I'm going to start with the one that might be a little bit shorter. So how much does it cost to hire a facilitator?
Depends. And that's not, it depends upon the stakes of the meeting. I think that a better investment for most, and I don't want to cut my own throat here, but a better investment is learn to get better at facilitating. And that starts with getting better at meetings. If I were in a department and I were particularly a young professional, I wish I had done this earlier in my career, I would find a way to practice. And all of the tips from a speaking standpoint are also true about facilitation. Like there's a ton of overlap there. But think about what your goals are, what you hope to accomplish, work through that worksheet a little bit. And then a facilitator, like for us for a day, and I'll just throw this out there. For us for a day, we don't work for a day for less than $5,000. Usually it's double that. But we're not just facilitating. We're designing meetings, we're facilitating them, we're creating engagement. We use worksheets and tools, virtually or otherwise. We use a tool called Mural, where people can use stuff on all gigantic Post-it notes in a virtual way. And so the facilitation, it's an investment in your own career that would be valuable. And especially if you got 4 or 5 people who are getting better in your department, bring someone who doesn't have table stakes in that meeting and facilitate one another's. So you get to bring an outsider viewpoint. And also someone who doesn't have a horse in the race. Zombie participants. I'm seeing that, Nicole, I want to answer this one if I can. Zombie participants in person, it's amazing because you stand behind them, right? You bring, as you walk around the room, bring the entire room's attention to them, and they engage. Poke fun, not like have fun with them, not poke fun at them, but getting people to share, engage, and some people just. And I think about how powerful Stephanie's story was. Some people just aren't ready for the day, right? They've got something going on. And we're in a world right now where everybody has something going on. I joked about the number 7 before, but I'll ask people all the time, on a scale of 1 to 7 with 10 being highest, how are you doing? Because no one's at a 10 right now. And so kind of thinking about that when you're otherwise critiquing your virtual performance makes a big difference.
Great, thanks. And I just want to point out, I advanced the slide just to do some, shameless plugs here, not because we're ending quite yet. We still have a few minutes and a few more questions. But I did turn on my camera for this next question, Matt. How do you feel about people who choose to have their camera on or off? And how do you encourage usage?
It depends on the size of the group. In a group this large, I like to have some people have their cameras on. We struggled with that a little bit early on in the workshop that Carolyn mentioned at the very beginning. But by having enough people put their cameras on, it tends to cascade. You can set that as an expectation. If you own the room, own the people, and I mean that sounds terrible. If the people are otherwise reporting to you in some way, you can mandate it. I think the real value is if you don't need cameras, then do it as a telephone call. Let people walk around. Let them get away from their desk. But people almost always turn on video when they're in small breakout groups. So if you really want that engagement, push that first. It tends to trigger them a little bit. But people got other stuff going on, right? It's hard to demand it unless maybe you ask for it in just some small pieces here and there.
Not seeing any more questions. Oh,
I've got a tip that may expect that if you're using any new technology, 1/3 of your audience will not be able to figure it out, no matter how basic that is, unless they use it all the time. So play with tools, but slowly introduce folks to tools versus expect an entire room full of people to be able to figure them out immediately, no matter how cool they are. And I am on the other side of the brick banner that Stephanie used. She's right over here, right behind me on the other side of this wall.
So maybe I can throw in a question, or maybe question/comment. I think when you do breakout rooms, a lot of breakout rooms that, the first question that is asked is, well, what are we supposed to do? We're not clear what we're supposed to do. Any advice on that? Of course, clear instructions, but how do you provide those instructions?
We use, as simple as it sounds, we use worksheets. Our toolkit, Mural, is pretty easy to use. It's mural.co. But otherwise, we use Google Slides. We put the worksheet image behind the slide as a background. We put some text boxes on it. It's really it's simple, it's inelegant, but we'll put one, like if there's 10 breakouts, we'll just do 10 of the same slides, breakout 1, 2, 3, 4 on the exact same presentation. We share that presentation out with no password, no login required. And in a group of 4 people, there's at least one rule follower who can't stand the fact that you're not working on the worksheet and answering all the questions. So that makes a huge difference for us. There's also some, as the facilitator, if I'm popping around from group to group, I regularly will tell a group, and I know Carolyn has heard this, your quality of your work is great, but the quantity is way behind everyone else. And sometimes just that simple, silly prompt gets people to pick up the pace.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a couple more questions, Nicole.
Yes, so I have one here about effective emails versus bad meetings. This person says, in any given week, I could send the same person 3 to 4 emails about different things, sometimes more depending on the time of year. So what might be a solution to make email more effective?
That's a culture problem. Write better emails, 1, write shorter emails, 2. And if they're inside your organization, they're not paying attention, you need to find a way to call them out. Something as simple as a scoreboard, and there's a nonprofit here locally that we love. They actually do this for their board members, right? They literally have, it's a gigantic poster, we're not seeing it now, but a gigantic poster in their boardroom that has all the requirements with check boxes on what every board member has done. And no one wants to walk into that boardroom for a board meeting seeing that. Having whether it's a spreadsheet, having some sort of metric or measure is one possibility. And the other hand, some people just won't be prepared. So if you said your job is to read this email, we're starting right in with discussion. I'm not going to read it again. What Jeff Bezos does at Amazon that solves for this a bit is they give everyone 10 minutes at the beginning of every event, like every meeting, to read the paper. They don't do PowerPoint. They read the paper quietly and then begin. So if you're worried about that, you can build that time into your meetings.
Okay, great. Another question is do you have any resources that you could recommend for folks who want to become better facilitators themselves? Yeah,
if you go to thefilament.com, I'll put it here. I do a newsletter every week called the Monday Morning Meeting. I share all the cool stuff we found. We have lots of tools and resources on our site. There's so many good ones out there. One of my favorites, Google has put out a bunch of stuff that they use to run their meetings. And it's really basic, it's really simple. I don't have the link handy, but happy to share. But it's think about your meetings, try and experiment in each one. And all of a sudden you might find that you're having less of them and they work better and you're dramatically more engaged.
Okay, great. And then it looks like there's maybe 2 more here. So are you aware of any technologies that are particularly good for the social aspect of meetings? They kind of throw in Animal Crossing as an example.
Yeah, this will be the last one I answer because facilitators are only judged on whether the meetings end on time or if people get to go to the bathroom. So we're at the top of the hour. My quick answer to that is that Zoom, everyone can use. It's okay. There's an arms race right now in virtual meeting tools and engagement. It's impossible to keep up with stuff, but follow along. One I like particularly now is it's rebranding in Maestro conference, as in Maestro, the director. But all the tools are really getting better and better every day. So what you like tomorrow is going to be different than what you like today. So just pay attention and try some stuff.
Okay, well, thank you very much, both Matt and Stephanie and Nicole for facilitating also. I think it's been very, very instructive, and I would really encourage all of you, to share this information and, provide other colleagues that are not in our area, but obviously what we heard is very useful for all of us, regardless of what we do. And I'll provide them a link to our website and to the recording. And definitely feel free to engage with Matt and Stephanie yourself directly if you want to follow up. But I think it's been very useful. See the slide, all of you have looked at it already for the last 5 minutes, unless you were looking at your own image there. But information is there, things to come. Go to the website. And with that, I'm going to close the session. And thanks everybody for participating. And thank again, Stephanie and Matt in particular. Thanks.
Thanks everyone.